Paulo Kagame owa Rwanda ne M23 eyebasime anti-UN Security Council etudde eranga erangiridde olwalero Paulo Kagame ebibye byagenze dda.
To the representative of Angola, His Excellency Ambassador Amar Benjama, President of United Nations Security Council for the month of January, distinguished members of the Security Council, we welcome the presence of Her Excellency Teresa Kayakwamba Wagner, State Minister, Minister of Foreign Affairs, International Cooperation and Francophonie of the Democratic Republic of Congo, DRC, and Ambassador Ernesto Remusillo, Permanent Representative of the Republic of Rwanda to the United Nations. We thank Mrs. Viviane Van Perre, Deputy Special Representative of the Secretary General for Protection and Operations, for her briefing on the latest developments on the ground and for her bravery in keeping high the UN flag under these difficult circumstances. We deplore today's attacks against diplomatic missions in Kinshasa and call on DRC authorities to ensure their protection under the 1961 Vienna Convention on the Diplomatic Relations. Mr. President, we are at a very critical juncture in the pursuit of lasting peace in the DRC and the normalization of diplomatic relations between the DRC and Rwanda. The M23 has made a significant military advance in North Kivu province, worsening the already fragile security and humanitarian situation in the eastern DRC. It resulted in the capture of the provincial capital, Goma, despite calls by the United Nations Security Council, the African Union, and the other actors in the international community to halt this military advance. This is a make-or-break moment that requires wisdom and pragmatism from the concerned parties and all relevant stakeholders, including the United Nations, the African Union, and sub-regional organizations. Although His Excellency João Manuel Gonçalves Lourenço, President of the Republic of Angola, African Union champion for peace and reconciliation, facilitator of the normalization of diplomatic relations between DRC and Rwanda, is making every effort to advance the Rwanda process, the security and humanitarian situation in the eastern DRC has suffered a substantial deterioration in the last few weeks. On 24th January 2025, the Angolan head of state expressed deep concern over the serious deterioration of the peace and security situation in the eastern DRC. He condemned and denounced the actions of M23 and its supporters, which undermine the progress made under the Rwanda process. He reaffirmed that there is no military solution to the conflict and urged the parties to return immediately to the negotiating table. Due to the rapid deterioration of the situation, members of the enhanced ad hoc verification mechanism and the expanded joint verification mechanism deployed in the city of Goma under the Rwanda process to support the pacification process in the eastern DRC on Sunday had to be evacuated to Angola. Mr. President, the UN Security Council is the oldest last resort when it comes to maintaining international peace and security. Its mandate is clear and must be respected and upheld. Today, we have one simple and direct message to this Council. The conflict in DRC must cease and the warring parties must return to the negotiating table. The ongoing hostilities in the eastern DRC have already claimed the lives of thousands of civilians and injured many others. Credible reports indicated that Goma has neither running water nor electricity, thus making living conditions of the population and those living in the IDP camps almost unbearable. In addition, millions of people have fled their homes and they don't know where to go. We demand the immediate and unconditional cessation of hostilities, the withdrawal of M23 from the occupied area, as well as the end of its establishment of parallel administration in DRC territory. We call for the full respect of integrity of DRC in accordance with the UN Charter, the international law, and the principles of sovereign equality of all member states. We call on all parties in conflict to fully respect international humanitarian and human rights law, the protection of civilians, IDP camps and medical sites, and the protection of peacekeepers, while noting that attacks on civilians and peacekeepers constitute war crimes. Direct attacks to MONUSCO and SAMI DRC personnel are unacceptable, and those responsible must be held accountable. We urge the signatories of the August 2024 ceasefire agreement to urgently resume dialogue without preconditions. In this context, we call on both parties to return to the Luanda process under the facilitation of His Excellency João Manuel Gonçalves Lourenço, President of the Republic of Angola. Mr. President, the hardly-won gains achieved through the Luanda process following months of intense negotiation must be preserved. In his capacity as the African Union Champion for Peace and Reconciliation, mandated to facilitate the mediation between Rwanda and DRC, His Excellency João Manuel Gonçalves Lourenço undertook several initiatives to resolve the difference between the two countries and made substantial progress, including the signing of the DRC-Rwanda ceasefire agreement on the 30th July 2024, which entered into force on 4th August 2024. On 15 December 2024, he convened a summit of the presidents of the two countries, which was subsequently postponed due to disagreement regarding how to address the M23 issue. We reiterate our call for a speedy and unconditional de-escalation of hostilities and genuine and renewed commitment to peace by both sides. Immediate return to the negotiating table is the only way out, since the conflict and security challenges in the eastern DRC have no military solution. The parties must continue exploring ways to settle the M23 pending issue to create conditions to reschedule the tripartite summit. We encourage the resumption of contacts between His Excellency Uhuru Kenyatta, former President of the Republic of Kenya, and the facilitator mandate by the East African Community, with the armed groups in DRC, including the M23, under the Nairobi process, to address sources of grievances that have led to the current level of insecurity in DRC. The United Nations, the African Union, sub-regional organizations, and leaders in the region must work together in a complementary approach to bring DRC and Rwanda back to the Luanda process. To conclude, Mr. President, we continue encouraging all parties to avoid any actions or rhetoric that can further escalate tensions, including provocative language and inflammatory public statements, which are counterproductive to the diplomatic efforts to achieve a lasting solution to this conflict that has prevailed for so long. In his quest to advance the Luanda process, in the last few days, His Excellency João Manuel Gonçalves Lourenço, the President of the Republic of Angola, has been in contact with several African leaders. Today, he spoke with His Excellency Mohamed Ould Ghazouani, President of the Republic of Mauritania and current President of the African Union, and His Excellency Teodoro Obiang Nguema Basogo, President of the Republic of Equatorial Guinea and the current President of the Economic Community of Central Africa States, to which DRC and Rwanda are members. Angola reiterates the steadfast commitment of His Excellency João Manuel Gonçalves Lourenço to continue playing his role as the facilitator mandated by the African Union to assist the normalization of diplomatic relations between DRC and Rwanda to achieve peace and security in the Eastern DRC. I thank you. I thank the representative of Angola for their statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Uruguay.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Agradecemos la información proporcionada por la señora Vivian van der Pierre, representante especial adjunta para la protección y operaciones en la misión de estabilización de las Naciones Unidas y la República Democrática del Congo, así como la convocatoria de esta reunión informativa por parte de la presidencia. Destacamos el rol del Consejo de Seguridad en este tema, que ha impulsado un alto al fuego en línea con el comunicado emitido por sus miembros en la noche del domingo 26 de enero, con cuyo contenido coincidimos totalmente. Agradecemos en ese sentido a los miembros del Consejo por su receptividad y rapidez para atender el tema, pero lamentablemente la situación en el terreno continúa siendo crítica. No obstante haberse anunciado precisamente un cese al fuego, los combates continúan y por lo que debemos continuar todos nosotros y especial el Consejo dándole la máxima prioridad al cese de hostilidades. Solo esto permitiría volver a las negociaciones para arribar a una solución política duradera en el marco de los procesos de paz de Luanda y Nairobi. Con relación a la ofensiva del M23, se ha generado una situación extremadamente crítica para las poblaciones de la zona, al tiempo que se ha puesto en riesgo la seguridad de los contingentes que integran la MONUSCO. En ese sentido, se valora lo expresado por el secretario general, quien ha señalado que estos ataques pueden constituir crímenes de guerra que deben ser investigados y cuyos responsables deben rendirse. Ante esta situación, pedimos su condena y que el Consejo de Seguridad tome la condena de estas acciones y que el Consejo de Seguridad tome todas las medidas necesarias para lograr que la ofensiva del M23 y aquellos que la apoyan se detengan y se consolide el cese de las hostilidades con pleno respeto a la integridad de las fuerzas de paz. En cuanto al desarrollo de la crisis en el terreno, reconocemos positivamente las orientaciones que el comando de la MONUSCO ha definido para impulsar la seguridad de las poblaciones civiles y de los contingentes de las fuerzas de paz ante esta ofensiva. Sin perjuicio de ello, expresamos la necesidad de directivas claras para los procedimientos a seguir, así como el máximo apoyo a los contingentes nacionales en materia logística y de suministros para que puedan hacer frente a las crisis humanitarias que afectan a la población local y las consecuencias de la entrega de armas por las tropas congoleñas, así como su atención médica. Uruguay reitera su compromiso una vez más con la paz en la República Democrática del Congo y su apoyo a la MONUSCO en estos momentos.
Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Uruguay for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Zimbabwe.
Thank you, Mr. President. On behalf of the Southern African Development Community, SADC, allow me to express our gratitude to you for convening this urgent meeting to address the escalating situation in the Democratic Republic of Congo. That we meet again on this issue following the session on Sunday, the 26th of January, underscores the gravity of the unfolding crisis. We welcome the briefing by Deputy Special Representative Vivian van der Pierre, and we also recognize the presence of the Foreign Minister of the DRC, Her Excellency Therese Wagner. Mr. President, Zimbabwe, as does SADC, remains unwavering in its adherence to the principles enshrined in the United Nations Charter, particularly the peaceful settlement of disputes and the commitment to respecting the territorial integrity and political independence of states. These principles are more critical than ever as we confront the deepening crisis in the Eastern DRC, particularly in Goma. Mr. President, the chairman of SADC, His Excellency President Emmerson Damson Mnangagwa, issued a statement yesterday in which he conveyed his profound concern over the deteriorating security and humanitarian conditions in the eastern DRC, brought about by offensive operations of the M23 rebel group and its allies. He condemns unequivocally the cowardly attacks on the UN and SADC peacekeepers, some of whom have paid the ultimate price in the pursuit of peace. On behalf of SADC, President Mnangagwa extended heartfelt condolences to the families of the fallen peacekeepers and wished them, those injured, a speedy and full recovery. Mr. President, the persistent instability in the eastern DRC, exacerbated by the actions of the M23 rebel group, represents a grave threat to peace and security in the region. The occupation of Goma and other areas by armed groups undermines the sovereignty of the DRC and the stability of the Great Lakes region as a whole. We commend all efforts deployed at the local, regional, and international levels in addressing this crisis. However, we stress that sustainable peace can only be achieved through dialogue, strengthened governance, and robust international support. To this end, we urge the United Nations and the Security Council to, 1, provide enhanced support for the protection of civilians and the stabilization of conflict-affected areas. 2, ensure accountability for violations of international humanitarian law and human rights, including the attacks on peacekeepers and civilians. 3, address the root causes of the conflict, including the illicit exploitation of natural resources, which continues to fuel instability. 4, facilitate the movement of humanitarian assistance. Mr. President, as SADC chair, Zimbabwe reaffirms its commitment to collaborating with the African Union, the United Nations, and all stakeholders to achieve lasting peace in the DRC. The current crisis highlights the urgent need to reform the international peace and security architecture, including the Security Council, to better respond to the unique challenges facing Africa. Moreover, we reiterate the importance of eliminating the illicit trade in small arms and light weapons, which perpetuates instability across the continent. Mr. President, in conclusion, SADC stands in full solidarity with the people and government of the Democratic Republic of Congo. We call on all stakeholders to act decisively to prevent further escalation, safeguard lives, and restore peace and stability. This is a moment for collective action, a moment to demonstrate our shared commitment to unity, peace, and sustainable development. Zimbabwe and SADC stand ready to contribute meaningfully to these efforts, and we look forward to working with our partners to forge a peaceful and prosperous future for the DRC, the SADC region, and beyond. To that end, the President of the Republic of Zimbabwe and current chairperson of SADC has called for an extraordinary summit scheduled for the 30th of January 2025 to discuss this matter. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Zimbabwe for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Burundi.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Monsieur le Président,
Mr. President,
ma délégation se
my
réjouit de
delegation
participer
is
une nouvelle fois à ce briefing sur la détérioration de la situation sécuritaire en République démocratique du Congo, marquée par les récents développements dans la ville de Goma. Elle félicite la présidence algérienne du Conseil pour avoir convoqué cette réunion dans un délai aussi court. Je salue la présence de son Excellence Madame la ministre des Affaires étrangères de la RDC, son Excellence Thérèse Kayikwamba-Wagner, et me réjouis du briefing fait par Madame Viviane Van de Peer, représentante spéciale adjointe chargée de la protection des opérations à la MONUSCO. Avant d'entamer mon propos, le gouvernement du Burundi présente ses condoléances aux soldats qui ont perdu leur vie durant les récents affrontements durant les 48 dernières heures. Monsieur le Président, pour la deuxième fois, en l'espace de 48 heures, nous sommes réunis pour constater avec une grande amertume que la situation à l'est de la RDC s'est gravement dégradée. Le moment est venu pour que les paroles cèdent la place à des actes concrets. Comme nous l'avons affirmé il y a 2 jours, le Burundi soutient fermement le respect de la coexistence pacifique entre les nations et rejette catégoriquement les guerres par procuration. Monsieur le Président, depuis près de 3 décennies, l'Est de la RDC est devenu le théâtre de massacres insoutenables, de conflits armés d'une rare violence alimentée par des intérêts étrangers exacerbant les tensions locales et sapant les efforts de paix. Chaque jour, des violations graves des droits humains sont observées et les victimes se comptent désormais en millions. Les récents développements à Goma témoignent d'un potentiel embrasement régional. Si aucune action concrète n'est prise aujourd'hui pour condamner les responsables et bloquer leurs actions, nous risquons de devenir les témoins d'une catastrophe et l'histoire nous tiendra directement responsables. À ce jour, le Burundi se félicite des accords bilatéraux avec la RDC en matière de coopération militaire pour la sécurité des frontières communes. Et si tu me permets de placer une petite parenthèse, le Burundi ne fait pas partie d'une quelconque coalition. Monsieur le Président, depuis des années, les Nations Unies, à travers le travail inestimable du groupe d'experts de la RDC, ont documenté avec précision les dynamiques de ce conflit. Des rapports multiples ont été présentés dans cette salle, soulignant l'implication d'acteurs extérieurs connus pour soutenir les groupes armés locaux, les violations flagrantes des droits de l'homme et le pillage systématique des ressources naturelles de la RDC. Combien de rapports supplémentaires faut-il avant que la communauté internationale, et en particulier le Conseil de sécurité, prenne ses responsabilités? Il y a 48 heures, au cours de notre intervention, nous nous sommes interrogés sur le silence assourdissant du Conseil de sécurité alors que des milliers de vies sont tragiquement perdues chaque jour. Où est la communauté internationale? Où est le Conseil de sécurité qui se montre si actif dans d'autres conflits? Devons-nous interpréter ce silence comme une sensibilité sélective? Comme l'a dit une fois Martin Luther King Jr., à la fin, nous nous souviendrons non pas des mots de nos ennemis, mais des silences de nos amis. Ne soyons pas les amis silencieux. Soyons du côté de la Charte des Nations Unies pour sauver l'ordre institué à San Francisco en juin 1945. Monsieur le Président, ce conflit dure depuis des décennies et pourtant aucune résolution n'a condamné le Rwanda, auteur de violations flagrantes des principes de la souveraineté nationale et de l'intégrité territoriale de la RDC. Le Rwanda ne nie même pas sa présence sur le terrain ni son soutien au M23, comme l'ont souligné plus des 3/4 des membres du Conseil lors de la dernière réunion. L'intégrité du territoire de la RDC ne peut être compromise et les incursions armées, les ingérences étrangères, le pillage systématique de ses ressources naturelles et les violations répétées de ses frontières doivent cesser immédiatement. Au regard de la situation sécuritaire humanitaire, le Burundi s'inscrit toujours du côté du plein respect du droit international et du droit international humanitaire. À cet effet, le Burundi condamne les violations flagrantes du droit international et du droit international humanitaire. Appelle à une cessation immédiate des hostilités à l'est de la RDC, à garantir que ce territoire ne devienne plus un terrain de confrontation indirecte entre acteurs régionaux et internationaux. Soutient les efforts des processus de Luanda et de Nairobi en exigeant le respect des engagements pris par toutes les parties. Exige le retrait des forces rwandaises de la RDC et réitère son attachement au respect de la souveraineté de la République the sovereignty of the DRC being upheld, as well as our commitment to its territorial integrity, its political independence, and its right to defend itself against any external act of aggression. We recommend that support continue to be provided to civilians and those displaced by this war in order to ensure that we meet their basic needs. Particular care must be given to women and children. To conclude, as we have already stated, the Security Council must pay heed to the legitimate demands of the government and people of the DRC. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Burundi for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of South Africa.
Mr. President, thank you for convening a second meeting within just a few days of the current tenuous situation in the Eastern DRC. The situation on the ground remains dangerously fluid as M23 continues its offensive campaign in North and South Kivu. We thank the Deputy Special Representative, Ms. Vivian van der Peer, for her briefing. And again, we wish to recognize the presence of Minister Therese Kayikwamba-Wagner in the chamber. Since the last meeting of the Council on the situation in the Eastern DRC, 4 additional South African peacekeepers lost their lives in the continuing conflict in Goma. On 27th January 2025, M23 launched several mortar bombs aimed at Goma Airport, which landed in the base of the South African troops, killing 3 soldiers and injuring some troops. A 4th soldier, as Minister said earlier, succumbed to his injuries sustained during the weekend attacks. This illustrates that the M23 is well-resourced and would have acquired such resources through means that are against the sanctions imposed by this Council. It is a contradiction in terms that a major UN peacekeeping troop contributing country could provide resources to an illegal armed group that is conducting offensives against peacekeepers, civilians, and key infrastructure, thereby undermining the mandate of this Council. That must be addressed with utmost urgency. As we stated at the last meeting of the Council a few days ago, the future of UN peacekeeping and its credibility is at stake if we are to tolerate such violations without any ramifications. The Security Council must speak with one voice and act in unison to stop the carnage unfolding in the Eastern DRC. Unfortunately, a press statement of the Security Council, while sending an important political message, has proven to be insufficient in the current situation. Consequently, South Africa would like to highlight the following issues. Firstly, the UN needs to, as a matter of urgency, provide additional support to MONUSCO in order to reinforce operational positions. This is to ensure that MONUSCO can fulfill its primary mandate to protect civilians. This support will also assist to ensure that no further peacekeepers' lives are lost. Similarly, a stronger consideration must be made to bolster the support that MONUSCO provides to the South African Development Community Mission in the DRC, SAMI DRC. Both missions, have the primary responsibility of protecting civilians and key civilian infrastructure. They are instrumental as long as armed groups remain active in the Eastern DRC. Secondly, we remain concerned about the worsening humanitarian situation with millions of people in need of humanitarian assistance. There is a need to ensure that appropriate conditions are created for humanitarian aid to reach people in need across Eastern DRC. All parties to the conflict must uphold international humanitarian law and human rights law. Thirdly, we reiterate our call for the resumption of negotiations under the Luanda process. South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa held a telephone call with President Kagame of Rwanda yesterday to discuss recent developments in the Eastern DRC and the escalation in fighting that has resulted in the deaths of many peacekeepers, including South Africans. The two heads of states agreed on the urgent need for a ceasefire and the resumption of the talks by all parties to the conflict. Accordingly, South Africa recognizes the significant strides made by President João Manuel Gonçalves Lourenço of Angola in facilitating peaceful resolution of the tensions between the DRC and Rwanda. We urge parties to recommit to these talks and address all outstanding issues amicably to allow the region to return to peace and the restoration of the political rapprochement and good neighborliness. This includes both sides addressing their relations with illegal armed groups and the withdrawal of the Rwanda Defense Forces from the DRC. We thus look forward to the much-anticipated East African Community Extraordinary Summit likely to take place in the coming days, with the participation of both President Tshisekedi and President Kagame. Lastly, the Council needs to underline the importance of preventative measures to avoid the recurrence of the cyclical conflict in the Eastern DRC. It is well known that the genesis of this conflict is primarily the illegal exploitation of the Congolese natural resources. International and regional efforts, including those initiated by the International Conference on the Great Lakes region to address the problem of the resource curse in the region, must be operationalized and supported. As I conclude, Mr. President, I wish to remind Council members that South Africa has suffered many casualties in this conflict. The reason we never hesitate in supporting peace efforts, even at excessive cost, is because we are a product of international solidarity at whose center was the United Nations. Therefore, the ultimate sacrifice of South African peacekeepers in the promoting peace and security in the Great Lakes region should not be in vain. Our plea is for this Council to always protect those who value, safeguard, and execute the mandates adopted in this chamber, and also hold into account those who violate the decisions of this very Council. Failure to do so can only undermine the credibility of and delegitimize the authority of this Council and the United Nations as a whole. We trust that all members of this Council and the international community can support measures towards establishing a ceasefire, encouraging dialogue, and promoting efforts towards peace and stability in the whole country and the Eastern DRC in particular. Thank you.
I thank the representative of South Africa for this statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Guatemala.
Señor presidente del Consejo de Seguridad, miembros de este Consejo, señora ministra de Relaciones Exteriores, Cooperación Internacional y Francofonía de la República Democrática del Congo, Thérèse Kayihwamba Wagner. Dada la urgencia de la situación en la República Democrática del Congo y su desarrollo, agradecemos la convocatoria de la reunión urgente del pasado 26 de enero y nuevamente el día de hoy. Agradecemos también la información recibida de la señora Viviane van de Per, representante especial adjunta para protección y operaciones de la MONUSCO, así como los esfuerzos por mantener informados oportunamente a los países contribuyentes de tropas. Señor presidente, el gobierno de Guatemala desea manifestar su gran preocupación por el agravamiento de las hostilidades en el este de la República Democrática del Congo. Condenamos en los términos más enérgicos la ofensiva lanzada por el movimiento 23 de marzo de las últimas semanas, su expansión a Kivu del Norte y la toma de la ciudad de Goma. Esta situación tiene un efecto devastador para la población civil, que al momento ha generado el desplazamiento de cerca de 3 millones de personas solo en Kivu del Norte. Como país contribuyente de tropas, Guatemala reitera su apoyo inquebrantable a los esfuerzos de paz en curso, a los procesos de Luanda y Nairobi, dirigidos a reducir las tensiones en la República Democrática del Congo. Lamentamos el fallecimiento de cascos azules de diferentes nacionalidades, incluyendo de Uruguay, Sudáfrica y Malawi, y esperamos la pronta recuperación de los heridos, incluyendo 2 oficiales guatemaltecos. Reafirmamos nuestro apoyo al mandato de la MONUSCO de proteger a los civiles y condenamos enérgicamente las acciones de los grupos armados que pongan en peligro la seguridad de los cascos azules de las Naciones Unidas y el personal civil. Su protección y seguridad inmediata debe ser garantizada, así como la provisión de los suministros necesarios para el desempeño de su misión. Guatemala expresa que los ataques contra cascos azules de Naciones Unidas pueden constituir crímenes de guerra conforme al derecho internacional, en particular teniendo en cuenta que la misión prioritaria cumplida por el contingente nacional es la protección de civiles ante peligro inminente de violencia física, la cual es cumplida de manera efectiva e imparcial. Esperamos que el Consejo de Seguridad tome de manera unívoca y con carácter urgente medidas contundentes condenando los ataques contra los cascos azules que cada vez están más en riesgo. Señor presidente, exhortamos a todos los actores a que respeten la soberanía y la integridad territorial de la República Democrática del Congo y pongan fin a todas las formas de apoyo a los grupos armados, ya sean congoleños o extranjeros. Muchas gracias.
I thank the representative of Guatemala for this statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Senegal.
Je vous remercie, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Mr.
Monsieur le
President.
Président, le Sénégal voudrait remercier l'Algérie pour la tenue de cette importante réunion et saluer l'exposé de Mme Viviane van de Per. Ma délégation se félicite également de la présence de Son Excellence Mme Thérèse Kayihwamba Wagner, ministre des Affaires étrangères de la République démocratique du Congo. À l'entente de son intervention, ma délégation s'incline devant la mémoire de tous les casques bleus et soldats tombés au champ d'honneur.
In the line of duty. Senegal would like to present its most sincere condolences to South Africa, Malawi and Uruguay in particular. We stand in solidarity with the people of the DRC and all UN staff on the ground to continue to lend assistance and comfort to people in need and, in many ways, at risk of their lives. My delegation would like to extend its thoughts and prayers prayers for civilians and would like to wish a speedy recovery for those injured. My delegation would like to reiterate its commitment to accountability for all crimes committed against UN staff, as stipulated in Resolution 2589 of 2021. Mr. President, as you can imagine, Senegal, with its 459 sons and daughters in MONUSCO, is seriously concerned by the situation regarding the blue helmets on the ground. In Congo, indeed in August 1960, just 4 months after it acceded to its independence, Senegal engaged in the UN operation in Congo, so my country has remained actively engaged in UN efforts to bring peace to the region. In these difficult times, we would reiterate to all parties the obligations incumbent upon them to protect civilians, in particular women and children, and peacekeepers and humanitarian staff, and also to reiterate the necessary respect for human rights. Like the previous speakers, Senegal condemns in the strongest possible terms the resumption of fighting in North Kivu, and in particular in Goma, in flagrant violation of the ceasefire concluded on the 30th of July 2024. The uptick in clashes constitutes a serious attack on the security of the region and of the continent. We cannot allow the situation to deteriorate into a global crisis that will have an impact on hundreds of thousands of civilian lives, and in a region that has already been so sorely tested. This is why my delegation joins itself with the call of the A3+ of the Security Council, as well as that of the Secretary General, calling for the immediate cessation of the M23 offensive and its territorial expansion. The only option to this conflict is political in nature. Senegal would urge, therefore, all the parties to honour their commitments as the part of the ceasefire and to give diplomatic negotiations a chance under the auspices of the African and in good faith to strive for peace and regional stability. My country, therefore, reiterates its unfailing support for the African mediation efforts between the DRC and Rwanda that are currently being undertaken as part of the Rwanda process. Senegal also calls for ongoing consultations as part of the Nairobi process to settle the ongoing issue of armed groups, including the M23, and to pave the way to bring peace and stability to the region. Mr. President, my delegation does not wish to conclude without calling upon the Council to learn the correct lessons from this conflict and the impact it's having on MONUSCO. What we learn is that there have been many difficulties encountered, but the staff have been very resilient in accomplishing their mission. It is important for the Council to provide this mission with necessary resources to carry out its tasks, to contribute to the protection of civilians in the area where it's deployed, and to support stabilization of institutions in the DRC and the main reforms in the area of governance and security. This necessarily involves the guarantee of an environment propitious for its deployment, the involvement of all stakeholders, and better coordination with regional forces present in the DRC in terms of taking charge of the threat posed by armed groups. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Senegal for the statement. Her Excellency Ms. Thérèse Kaikwamba Wagner, State Minister, Minister of Foreign Affairs, International Cooperation and Francophonie of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, has asked for the floor to make a further statement. I give her the floor.
Mr. President, thank you for the floor. Members of the Council, first of all, I would like to note that for the first time in our meetings, Rwanda did extend condolences for the fallen peacekeepers. However, I would like to rectify something. The peacekeepers did not die in a process. The peacekeepers were killed. Second of all, SADC forces deployment through SAMI DRC were not deployed unilaterally by the DRC, but rather with a mandate from the AU, an organization Rwanda is a part of, even if its behavior in the DRC clearly flaunts its principles. Third, the M23 excluded itself from the Nairobi process by renewing attacks against the FARDC. The government of the DRC has nonetheless expressed its willingness to re-include the M23 in the Nairobi process. We reject Rwanda's obsession and attempts to elevate the M23 to the level of an interlocutor deemed fit to sit at the same table as a legitimate government. 30 years down the line, we have never stooped to the level of expecting and demanding from Rwanda to talk to its brothers and sisters, the FDLR, who are still in our country. We have not stooped to that level. Fourth, on regime change, we will remind the Rwandan delegation that the M23 and the AFC has repeatedly expressed its intent to march in Kinshasa. The very M23 Rwanda forces are backing right now. There is a subtlety that should not go amiss between words and actions. Rwanda's actions, side by side with the M23, are actions seeking to overthrow a legitimately established government. On the Luanda and Nairobi processes, we will remind the Rwandan representative that the DRC never left the negotiating table. It was Rwanda that did not show up on the 15th. It was Rwanda that did not come when President Lorenzo invited us. And President Kenyatta was also present. President Tshisekedi honored his commitment. In the past weeks, we have seen efforts, calls from this council, from our partners, from our friends, urging us all to renew our efforts within the Luanda process. The DRC never left the table. It is up to Rwanda to come back to the table. I would also like to remind the Council that in this very session, the government of the DRC, through my own statement, condemned all attacks against diplomatic missions in the DRC. We do this in our concern to abide by and respect international law. However, we have yet to hear Rwanda explain to us what its efforts have been to abide by international law and to respond to the violations it has been found guilty of in the DRC. Violations of the Charter, violations of international humanitarian law, violations of international human rights law. Members of the Council, I would like to close with what has brought us back here in less than 48 hours. Rwanda's outright contempt for this Council and its declaration that it will not, for the Council and the Council's declaration, and its demonstration that it is in the deluded belief that there is a Rwandan exception when it comes to international law. But what has also brought us here is the Council's choice 2 days ago to opt for words and not for actions. This Council is not unable to take actions. In fact, it is uniquely equipped to take actions. Hence, the question that remains at the end of this meeting is whether this Council is unwilling to act. Thank you.
I thank Her Excellency Ms. Kayikwamba Wagner for her statement. There are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. The meeting is adjourned.
Ebya Congo, Rwanda ne Paulo Kagame byibyo. Birungi si birungi UN muulidde resolution zonna zibawaddeyo buli omu zaawaddeyo ku bulumi bw'alina ku mutima n'eggwanga lya Rwanda ne M23 era nga oludde South Africa eremedde kola okubaawo ekikolebwa nti bino byonna bibasiisiza Kagame akazigo kitegeeza nti bawagira ebikolwa byakola tebakoze kigwanidde kulaba nga bakomya ebikolwa bye wabula basirise busirisi bamwenyako bumwenya mu kifo ky'okukola ebigwanidde ddala okunyiga Kagame bamumala amamiima basobole okumusirisa akomye ejjooga akamanyiro ne fujjo byali mukola ku ggwanga lya Congo. Bangi bawera nti bajja kufaana obutanyagwa nti balina kukkiriza Kagame n'akabinja ke okwerigoosiriza mu ggwanga lya Congo kubanga balowooza nti nno byakuzanyiramu bagenda kubikola byonna. Bavaana nga kimu kikoleddwa nga Kagame amaze okubikka ku mumwa nga taddamu kumanyiira muntu yenna, taddamu kukola bintu byonna bitagwanidde kuba ku bukulembeze bwa banne ku nsi za banne kubanga ayagala ozibbamu ebyobugagga ng'akozesa olukwesikwesi nga yeegaggawaza ye nga z'ensi zongera kuba njavu naye ng'ono yabba ebyobugagga byabwe.